Today is March 27, 2024, and we're here at the offices of Cook, Yancey, King & Galloway to interview Gordon E. Rountree. Gordon, tell us a little bit about your early years. I know you grew up in Shreveport, but tell us a little bit about your early years and to sort of get this ball rolling a little bit.
Okay, well, I went to the normal school situation. I went to Byrd High School, and at that time I had gotten into golf. My mother in particular would not let me play football, and so she was a golfer and she got me into that, and I played for Byrd on the golf team, and as a junior golfer spent a lot of time at Quirby's in the 50s, and anyway, after that went to Washington Lee University, graduated, interrupt me anytime you want, graduated from there in 1960. I got to play football there because my mother no longer controlled my days and nights, and I was lucky to do that because it'd gone to a non-scholarship situation because of some infractions by the football team in 1951, I think it was. So anyway, they had discontinued the scholarship program, so I got to play, and I liked that. And
what position did you play?
I played right guard on offense and defensive tackle. You know, and back in those days, as you know, you played during that period of time on a good school. I mean, a good football school. Well, I don't know, maybe I should qualify that. You played for Tulane a few years after that at a much higher level than I did, of course. But anyway, we played both ways most of the time. It wasn't just...
Who were your opponents? Did you play Swanee? Was that one?
Played Swanee. We played Center, C-E-N-T-R-E, in Kentucky. Played Hampton-Sydney, schools like that. I played lacrosse too, and we were better on the national level there. We played a lot of good schools like UVA, University of Virginia, and all that. So,
all right. After after undergraduate school, I think you went into the service. Is that right?
I did.
Were you an ROTC man?
I was. Back in those days, Herschel, we had the draft, and it was just expected that you serve your country, and I'm so grateful I did. I grew up in the military, meaning that I learned about responsibility and structure and discipline. I mean, I'm not saying I did have that from my parents, but to a greater degree, I learned about it in the military, and it was really, really good for me. ROTC, I wanted to go in with a commission rather than as an enlisted man, and went to, after I got married in late 1960 and early 1961, went to Fort Benning. I was in the infantry, Army infantry, and went through officer basic there, and then I went through airborne training school, finished that, graduated from that, got my wings, and my duty station was West Berlin, Germany.
Well, that must have been really interesting because that was a hot situation at the time. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. One little quick story. Before that, though, after my training, there was the way the Army transported you to West Berlin, which I don't know if everybody understands this, but West Berlin was about 120 miles into East Germany. And so West Berlin at that time was Democratic and had a Democratic free society and government, whereas East Berlin was communist controlled, because after the Potsdam Agreement at the end of World War II, Germany was divided into sections, areas by the, at that conference. And so the French and the British and the Americans were together, obviously, at that time, and they, the free world, so to speak, had control of a certain part of Germany, mostly southern Germany. And so the Russians had northern and in the eastern part of Germany. So, but West Berlin was different. It was in East Germany.
Was it independently governed, or was it governed by the German government in Bonn? Because that's where
it was governed by the German government, but overseen by the Allied powers. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, long story short, the wall was not constructed then. The wall went up 2 months after I got there. I got there in June of 1961. The wall was built on August the 13th of 1961. But anyway, what I'm saying is the way they got us, they transported the American troops to West Berlin was through, as we call it, the Russian zone, as it was called. And you had to go on a military duty train, but it only ran at night because the Russians did not want the Americans to see anything that they were doing in that 110 miles. I said 120, I was wrong, it was 110 miles. And of course, here I was with my wife getting on this duty night train from Frankfurt. It was going to go all the way to West Berlin at night, and we were instructed that we couldn't even look out the window to see what the outside looked like. So here I was in my green dress uniform, which was required, and my wife, and we were on this train. Of course, I looked out the window. I just spread the curtains apart, and there were these towers, these wooden towers with machine guns at top that was manned by the East Germans, all the way that 110 miles. I mean, they were quite a few of them. And that moment, I internally I said, my goodness, what's this college boy got himself into? Here I am, just a fraternity guy from a college education, just gotten married. That's a big step. And here I am going to the military, and I'm looking at these machine gun towers, these towers manned by the East Germans and the Russians, going into East Germany, which was Russian controlled. And that's when I grew up. I said, "Oh boy, you better get your stuff together."
I'm sort of interested. I wouldn't have realized that your wife would have been able to go to West Berlin with you. That's
correct.
I'm surprised at that.
Well, the Army made a mistake somewhere along the line, and I didn't have any influence on anybody. It was just a mistake. In fact, when we got to West Berlin successfully, and we were there by the next morning, we went and went through the sign-in process, and the enlisted man that I was talking to at this process said, "Well, we can work on getting your wife over here. It'll take some doing, but you have to fill out a bunch of papers." I said, "Well, she's sitting right outside." So they had made a mistake somehow. Because I was a reserve officer. I had a 2-year active duty commitment with 6 years in the reserve. Mm-hmm. And those folks, they call them regular Army and reserve. I mean, even though I had 2 years active duty, you're still called reserves. And so folks in my category, they were not regular Army, had not signed up for the life business. You didn't get a duty station like West Berlin. That was one that was kind of cherished. It turned into not quite as good a duty station later, yeah, after the wall was built. But at the time I went in, it was a coveted assignment.
So that was just a mistake too, or had you applied for it?
No, I had not. I don't remember. I don't think I'd applied for that. I just, no, I don't remember applying for that.
Well, where did you live? Did they have?
We had to live. They didn't have any quarters for married officers, just the single officers, and so we had to live on the economy. We lived we rented the upstairs of a little small house from a German couple. They had actually defected from East Berlin to West Berlin, and they were wonderful people. They didn't speak a word of English, and we didn't speak any German, but we communicated just fine. They were wonderful, wonderful people.
Yeah.
And anyway, we got to be very close.
What were your duties?
I was a second lieutenant, and I was a platoon leader, and we had 5,000 American troops, 4,000 British, and 3,000 French. And I was a normal Army infantry platoon leader. I had 40 men under my control, and then it all, it hit the fan in August. We were what the Army was doing then, Herschel, in Berlin, was they were sending half of those 5,000 troops down to southern Germany where we could fire live ammunition in our training. Because in Berlin, it's in the middle of a city. You can't fire live ammunition in the middle of a city. So we just had our war games with blanks. But so we were down there. Our half of the battle group was down there in southern Germany, right by Weilflecken, Weilflecken as they call it. So anyway, the wall goes up, and we learn about it, and we were so concerned about our wives back there in West Berlin, and I remember I had two very close friends, and we all three got together and got through on the telephone, got through to one of them, and the wives had just gotten so stressed about the wall, and because there was a lot of anticipation. Apparently, they knew it was coming. I mean, the American military knew it was coming pretty soon, and there was a lot of media coverage about it at the time. And our wives had decided they were so stressed they just got together, started drinking Manhattans, and forgot about it. And so we called them we love you and we're coming back, and don't worry, it's all going to be okay. They didn't even know the wall was built. They're right there. We heard the tanks going through a lot. We heard a lot of rumbling and everything, but we didn't even know. But anyway, that was an experience. The wall went up, and then we had a lot of duty in connection with that. And it wasn't anything really contentious between the Russians and the Americans at that time, because apparently it was somewhat of a surprise to the administration. And I remember I learned later that Kennedy was out on his yacht. He was the president. Jack Kennedy was the president at the time. He was out on his yacht, and it was a shock to him when the wall went up, even though there was, that it was suspected that it was going to come up, but they thought it was going to come up early in the next year, 1962, but it went up early. So, I had duty on the wall all the time, and the most dangerous situation was in October of '61 when it just heated up, because after they built the wall, Herschel, dividing East Berlin and West Berlin, there was also the concertina wire, the rolled wire with the thorns in it, the metal thorns. They were all over that wall all the way across. And these kids from East Germany, most of them were young men, they were trying to defect into West Berlin. And that's the reason the wall went up, because there were so many East Germans and East Berliners primarily that were defecting, and because they didn't like that way of life.
Like your landlord.
Yes, and they came across the border before the wall was built, and so East Germany and Russia built the wall to stop them from leaving.
What if you had a job in East Berlin and you lived in West Berlin, or vice versa? Did they just lose their jobs then?
Yeah. Because that's what was happening. The East Berliners, many of them were working in West Berlin during the daytime, and they go back to their home in East Berlin at night. But when the wall went up, that was it. So I remember I had a good friend who was in the armor division. That's the tanks, of course. And he was on Friedrichstrasse, which is where it happened. The going back just a little bit, Russia had 725 tanks in close proximity to in East Berlin and in the surrounding area. We had one tank company, which is 25 tanks. Definitely outmanned, But the tank platoon leader, anyway, what had happened was that an young East German man tried to defect, and they shot him, and they left him hanging in the concertina wire for a long time. And it was so maddening to the West Berliners and the Western world and all that. A couple other things that happened. Tensions grew, and we ended up where our tanks were there on Friedrichstrasse, and the Russian tanks were on the other side, and they were lined up in the barrels of the two tanks that were the lead tanks were about 20, 30 feet apart.
Wow.
And here you've got a 90 millimeter cannon on our side and a 120 one on the other side. And and my friend who was a tank platoon leader said, Gordon, he said, I had the safety off.
Wow.
It was ready to go. He said, I was scared to death. But anyway, that resolved itself without anybody trying to breach the wall. Because Kennedy, contemplated maybe knocking a hole in the wall. And he made a wise decision to back off of everything.
Was there a lot of intrigue with people trying to get out of East Berlin? And
they were trying to escape all the time.
Was there any other way other than over the wall through the concertina wire? And I guess some made it, huh?
I don't know, not too many, because they made the East Germans made a issue of killing the kids the young men who were trying to, it was a great experience for me. I mean, it was bad, but it was, I learned, and I had my duties as an infantry platoon leader, but I was drafted, so to speak, in the intelligence section. And I had to run patrols in the East Berlin, and we ran them in these.
Well, how did you do that?
Well, you did them in vehicles because the Allies had the right to go into East Berlin under this Potsdam Agreement, and the Russians had the right to go into West Berlin. So we had to let their vehicles in through Checkpoint Charlie, which is I was giving you the street name, but I'm not even sure the street name I gave you is right, but it's Checkpoint Charlie it was referred to. And then we were able to get in our Opel sedans and go to the other side and go all the way around East Berlin and check to see what was happening, whether the Russians were building up anything over there or not. And so American military ran patrols 24 hours a day, and the Russians did too.
And there were no incidents in all of that?
The East Germans tried to detain our patrols when we got over there. And my first assignment as a patrol leader, after they trained us, because we were trained where the Russian installations were and what to do and all that. I mean, this doesn't result in combat. I mean, I did not experience combat, but it came close. But anyway, I remember the first patrol I was assigned to, where I was a patrol leader, turned out to be at night. And they had trained us during the daytime in the routes and everything. So I had a driver from Rayville, Louisiana, of all things. I mean, way over in West Berlin, and there's two guys from Louisiana in a patrol, and my platoon sergeant, and three of us in the vehicle, and we are lost bigger than hell in the East Berlin. We don't know where we are. we're on the floor with flashlights. I mean, except the driver, trying to figure out where we were, and all of a sudden I look up, and there I see this gate and this big red star up there. And we're saying, oh my God, we breached the rules. We weren't supposed to get any closer than about 500 yards to the Russian installations, but we had gotten about 50 yards from one.
So did you have a designated route to follow?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
And so if you got off of that route, you were subject to being
lost.
penalized.
Well, no, even in the designated route, I mean, they knew where we were going. They followed us
really?
in Mercedes. And so we were in these little Opel sedans with a small engine, and they definitely had superiority there. But they would try to stop us. And so anyway, the Russian guard comes out of the guardhouse. They had those AK submachine guns. They were rifles, but they were called AKs. They were an aberration of an alteration of the machine gun. But he sticks the barrel of that AK in my driver's left ear. And I remember his name was Moss. I'll never forget it. And I said, Moss, you got to floor it, because I could see a side street. You got to floor it and go. I mean, because this Russian guard is young like we were. He was jabbering Russian, and I didn't know whether he had ammunition in there or not, or what the hell to do, because we had gotten too close, and we shouldn't have gotten that close, but we were lost. I said, look, there's a side street down here, Moss. You just floor it and turn right, and I think we'll get out of this thing. And he said, Lieutenant, I can't. My foot won't move. And I said, well, can you put it in reverse? He said, I think I could do that. And he turned it around, and we got the hell out of there back to Checkpoint Charlie. Anyway, I had a couple of those situations where they tried to stop us. But
okay, at this point, when you went in the Army, had you thought about going to law school, or did you have any plans? I know that you had your father was in the car business here in Shreveport,
right?
Rountree Olds Cadillac, and did you contemplate going back and working with him in the car business, or doing other things?
No, I had not, because I had trained in every department and of the car business, and I did not want to go in the car business. I didn't want to do that. I was a little bit, you know how we are when we're young, we're altruistic and we want to do something good. And I couldn't figure forcing somebody to buy a car or being pushy about it as contributing much of anything. But I'd worked in every department, and I'd gotten an understanding of it. And real quick story. I was in sales one time for my dad, and back in those days, the car dealerships were taking cars out to people's homes if they were a past customer or if they were a prospect, and people didn't even have to come in. It was a kind of a new thing. Most of the dealerships were doing it. So I'll never forget, I went out, I was told to go out to this person's home with an Oldsmobile and try to sell him the car. And so I called him and made an appointment, came out there with the Oldsmobile, and there was a nice couple, and we chatted a bit, and I found out he sold vacuum cleaners. That's what he did for a living. And we talked a little bit more, and upshot of the whole story was that he didn't buy a car, but I bought a vacuum cleaner. and when I reported to my dad about that, and he was not impressed. And so it was just something. I didn't want to go in the car business, and so when I got to I went in the military first, of course, for 2 years, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea, but I knew that I wanted to do something other than the car business, maybe something that might make a difference.
Did you have any lawyers in your family, or did you know any lawyers?
No, that's part of the story. And in the military, back in those days, the officers were appointed by the higher ups to defend enlisted men when they had done something wrong. But it was kind of like we'd call it a high-grade misdemeanor maybe, or a misdemeanor, or a really low-grade felony. Appoint officers who had no legal background to defend these young men who were charged with a special courts-martial. That was the level of punishment. The lowest level was an Article 15, and that the company commander did that, took care of that. And the next level was this special courts-martial. And then a general courts-martial, the military lawyers would handle those. But the special courts-martials, we were appointed. And I was appointed 3 or 4 times, like all of us were. And I just loved reading the Code of Military Justice. I fell in love with it. And that's when I got, the idea, the thought about, well, maybe I should go to law school, because I liked what I was reading, and I thought I did a pretty decent job. I remember one kid I defended. He was acquitted. He'd done something, it wasn't that bad. He had a knife on him or something like that. And I defended him. I did a good job, and he was acquitted by the court. The court consisted of 3 officers about a major lieutenant colonel level. And the problem with that, the upshot of that was that after he was acquitted, he defected to East Berlin, which was quite embarrassing for an American soldier to defect to the other side, because we knew he wouldn't be there long. They wouldn't want him either, and that's what happened. He stayed over there, and the Russians asked him everything in the world, and he stayed a few months, and then they kicked him out and sent him back.
Then what happened to him?
I don't know. All I know is that he came back to the West Berlin.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to him after that. But anyway, that's when I decided to go to law school.
Did you have?
I can thank the military for that.
Yeah.
It's part of growing up.
Did you have an idea of where you wanted to practice, or where you wanted to go to law school, or anything of that nature?
No, I had some close friends from college, from Washington and Lee, who were from Florida. And I went down and looked at the University of Florida Law School. And they were already in it because they had finished their military commitment. They had 6 months instead of 2 years active duty. And I looked at LSU and then learned enough about it to learn that, well, if you go to LSU, you can't, basically, back in those days, it was not easy to practice law in Louisiana if you hadn't gone to a Louisiana law school. So I decided I thought I might want to stay in Louisiana at the time, so I went to LSU.
Were you thinking you were going to come back to Shreveport, or is that not?
I hadn't
gotten that far.
I hadn't gotten that far.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how was law school?
It was great. I loved it.
Did you like law school more than you had liked undergraduate school? As far as the studies.
As far as the academics.
Yeah.
I liked law school more because I didn't study much in college. I had a good time in college.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I liked law school. The first year was hard. freshman year at LSU is hard because they flunk out a lot of people. Our class started with 161 and ended up with 59 graduating.
Wow.
So they're pretty, when they welcomed our class, I started in 63, and they tell you, they say, you know, look to the left, look to the right, and it would just be one of you 3 guys. And I say guys because there weren't any girls.
No girls in the class?
There were actually 2.
Did they stay and finish?
One of them did, and the other didn't. And one of them married Howard Lawfong, who was in my class that you know
Yeah.
that Howard taught you.
Yeah.
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 I can't remember her name, but
I've met her. I remember her.
yeah.
So how did you do in law
I did
school?
well. I did real well. I graduated number 2 in my class. I was hors de coif and on law review. I don't know, I didn't expect to do that well because I didn't make great grades in college. I didn't, I didn't do especially well in high school either, although I made B's and A's, but I wasn't I didn't burn it up.
Mm-hmm. So anything particularly memorable about your law school days that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I told you this story when we had lunch. You want to hear the same one?
I think that would be interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible.
Well, anyway, after the first semester, my grades were real well. I was number 3 in the class. I can't remember what my average was. But at LSU at that time, as you know, because you went there, I think 81 or an 82 was considered an A, something in that, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Something in that neighborhood?
Yeah, and 89 was the highest you could make.
Correct.
And nobody made 89s.
Yeah, and there weren't any A, B's, and C's there. It was just the numerical, and instead of being 100, it was 89.
Yeah.
So I had a high 70s. I think I had a 77 something average, but I was number 3 in the class. But I made a 68 in common law contracts, which was taught by Mr. Harrison, Dr. Harrison, who was the assistant dean at the time. And as we discussed at lunch, his name was Mickey Mouse. And he anyway, I don't know why he had that nickname, but he was. And so I made a 68 in his course, and the rest of my grades were in the high 70s. And I think I wrote the asterisks in one case. In one course I did. That's the highest grade in the class. That's what they called it back then.
I was going to say, explain what making the asterisk was.
Asterisks, when you get the asterisks in a course at LSU Law School, that means you wrote the best exam in the class.
And people would know you wrote the asterisks because the grades were on the bulletin board with names, not with Social Security numbers like they do now.
Right.
And the highest grade would have an asterisk by it, and what would the lowest grade have?
I don't remember.
Well, when I was there, they had an anchor by it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But I don't think the grades, in a lot of situations didn't make any difference about what kind of lawyer you made, because I think I've mentioned this story to you. The number 1 guy in our class was Paul Dewey, and he was brilliant, and he was a hard worker too. And the last guy in our class was Jerry Dodson, and he was just this, he was a great guy. I'm not going to say he was a screw up because he graduated. He did, but they teamed up and ultimately practiced law together, the best and the worst.
Yeah, Dewey and Dodson, and they were very successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, my Mickey Mouse story was, my grades were good except for contracts, and I'm not talking about obligations. I'm talking about common law contracts that Dean Harrison taught. And so the 68 puzzled me because I thought I wrote a good paper. So I decided to go see him, and I made an appointment. I wasn't going to complain about the grade. I was just going to ask him what I did wrong to warrant a 68 so that I could improve and not make the same mistakes on again. But anyway, so he gave me, I went in to see him, introduced myself, told him what I was there about. Well, I made a 68, and I wanted to know what about the paper, if he could make any suggestions for improvement. And he said, well, let me check something just a minute. And so he pulled out a bunch of papers, and then he had this big chart that he pulled out. And it was a very large chart, And he said, Mr. Rountree, let me explain. You did not do well on your LSAT score. You're in the bottom 10% of the class, in your class. And so what I have learned through studying this issue for years and keeping track of things, that the grades on the LSAT are going to be commensurate with your law school performance. And he said, 68 is about right. And so he said, it's consistent. So I said, well, Dean Harrison, I said, I understand what you're saying, but I said, I'm number 3 in my class. And I have a 77, whatever, at point something average. He looked at me like he was shocked. And he said, well, are you sure? And I said, yes, sir, I'm sure. I know what I made. And he said, well, I'm going to go check your grades, Mr. Rountree. So I guess he didn't believe me, but he wanted to double check and be sure. And he came back about 15 minutes later and said, well, you're right. He said, you do. You're number 3 and you have a 77 point something average. And he said, that's very unusual. That your grades are not consistent with your LSAT score. And so he said, and I said, well, now that you know that, Dean Harrison, do you have any suggestions or reasons or whatever your comments about my 68 that you might want to offer now or whatever make? Well, all I can say is you wrote a high 68, Mr. Rountree. So he didn't, that's all he said.
Do you suppose he looked at the SAT scores before he graded the papers?
Well, that was that was pretty, after I told my story to some of my friends, they said, well, that's what we had heard, that he grades that way. And so, I don't know.
That's awful.
But anyway.
Yeah.
So
any other law school stories that you might share with us?
Well, nothing academically, but there's a funny story that I have to relate that had to do with a professor there that his name was Dave Robinson. May have been Robertson, but I think it was Robinson. He was our torts professor the second semester our freshman year. We had Wex Malone for the first semester. And he was a real short. Dave was a little Dave. We called him Little Dave because that was his nickname. He was a little short guy, probably only a couple of years older than me when I started. I was 25 because I'd been in the military. Little Dave was just a little bit older, and he just graduated from LSU Law School, right at the top of his class. I'm not saying he was number 1, but he was right up there. Really smart guy, and he was a lot of fun. He would we had just the top 10%, as you know, make law review. So we were all on the top 10% was on law review. But Little Dave befriended himself to everybody he taught. He wanted to go drink beer. And so we did that a lot with Little Dave while he was our professor. And some of us got to be good friends with him. He was a lot of fun. He would play the guitar at night, and we'd go to his apartment. He'd play the guitar, and actually he would make up songs. He would take a Willie Nelson song and put adapt it to law school. And the lyrics were crazy, but he had a pretty decent voice, and he was real good after you had a few beers. But anyway, so the story I'm getting around to was that we had a law review party, and little Dave was there, along with the whole law review bunch. I was married and had one child, so I went home at a reasonable hour. The next day, a good friend of mine, Clark Martin, came up to me and he said, "I'm scared to death." I said, "Why? What do you mean?" Clark was single at the time. He said, "Well, we stayed too late, drank too much damn beer, and little Dave and I started ragging each other about running." Because he said, "I've done some track. I was pretty decent in track," and he thought he could run. So we came up with this crazy bet. We were both overserved. And he said, we agreed that we'd go out to the LSU track and run an 880 nude. I said, what? He said, nude. We were going to take all our clothes and our shoes off and go run and see, and we bet $5 to see who was going to win. So anyway, that's what happened. We all, little Dave and I, meaning Clark, we got out to the LSU track, and everybody left at the party came with us because they thought it was hilarious and they wanted to be witnesses. And so anyway, he said the first thing was we couldn't find the gate. We found out later when we left that we could have just walked in, but we thought the gate was locked, and we had to climb over the fence to get into the track to run. So we finally did that, and we stripped down and took our shoes off and ran, and little Dave didn't even hardly finish. I mean, he said I beat him by a long ways, and that was kind of it. Everybody went home after that. It was time to go home, and he said, but he said, Gordon, he said, there's a note on the bulletin board from Mr. Robinson from little Dave. He wants to see me in his office. And he said, we've got him for torts, and I think I might have screwed up doing all that. I was drunk, and and I shouldn't have beat him, and I don't know if what he's going to say. And I said, don't worry about it. He's going to laugh. He's okay. Clark was really petrified. He said, but I need to make a good grade in torts. I said, well, you got to go in and take your medicine. He did, and he came back and visited later, and he said, oh, God, it was all right. It was fine. I went in. I stood there in front of his desk. He was looking down papers. He didn't look up. And I said, Mr. Robinson, you put a note on the bulletin board to see me. And what do you want to talk about? And then he said I was getting more worried when he wouldn't even look at me. And then he said, then he looked up and started grinning and laughing and handed me the $5. And he said, so anyway, can you believe that?
Were there clerkships available for law students when you were in law school?
Oh, yeah.
Did you clerk for
No. I got an offer to clerk from Judge Hunter, Chug Hunter. I think he was in Lake Charles. Would that have been right? Mm-hmm. Or Lafayette?
Lake Charles.
Lake Charles.
Yeah.
And he was such a nice man. I almost did that, but I didn't.
I was talking about clerking with a law firm. Were those available when you were in law school?
I think yes, to some extent. I did not do that. I worked in the law library my first year, and I had enough military pay that I'd saved. I mean, back in those days, and in the military, you didn't get paid very much. But I think my total, with the allowance for housing, which was like $85, and the food allowance was $47.88, plus whatever else the base salary It was like $388 is all you made, but we saved money on that because
Wow.
it was not, you know, it wasn't, couldn't ever get out of West Berlin. I mean, you had to stay there because you'd have to go through the Russian zone to get any lengthy leave, and the Russians didn't allow that. So anyway, let me just say one thing before I forget it, because I want to get it in this interview, and which is very nice of you to do, and I appreciate it. I just feel that I'm blessed to practice law. I mean, it was the right thing for me. I was lucky I found the law as a career, and I loved it. I'm 85, and I'm still doing it to some extent. I've closed my law office and finishing up a couple of things at the house. But anyway, I'm just very grateful that I was fortunate enough to get in the right field of work for me.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed my friendships with the lawyers, including you, of course. And it's been a wonderful career experience for me.
Tell me how you decided what you were going to do after law school. How did that process go?
Just interviewed. You know, back in those days, some of the firms would come to LSU and interview, and then some of the firms would contact you and ask you to come wherever they were for interviews. And I almost stayed in Baton Rouge because one of our professors that I respected tremendously was Alvin Rubin. And he taught federal gift and estate tax and also law office practice, which was very valuable because most of us kept all of the forms that he gave us in law office practice, and I used them for years. But all of us respected him so much, and his firm made me an offer to stay in Baton Rouge, and I almost stayed. But I came to Shreveport because I had an offer from your firm, Cook, Clark, Egan, Yancey, and King at the time. And I guess from family, my mom and dad were still here, and I thought, well, okay, I'll start in Shreveport and see if that works, and if it doesn't work, I can always go somewhere else, maybe. So I was, I probably have told you this story, but I still remember it. I thought it was funny. When I came up to interview with Cook Clark, I talked to Mr. Yancey, Clarence Lee Yancey. He was the one responsible for interviewing the prospective young attorneys. And everything went fine.
Did you know him?
No, I really didn't. I knew of him. I knew my dad knew him.
Yeah.
But I didn't know Mr. Yancey.
Did you know any of the other lawyers?
No. I didn't know Sidney Cook, who was kind of the honcho back then, and I didn't know anybody. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Yancey made me an offer of a starting salary of $500 a month. And so you know how it is in law school, you keep up with all that.
Oh, yeah.
All your classmates, you talk about what offer you got and how much and all that stuff. Well, back in my day, the going rate, so to speak, was $550 a month. And other than, I think, everybody in law school that I know at my time was getting paid that, except there was one guy a year ahead of me who was just outstanding in mineral law, and he went with a firm in New Orleans, and they paid him $700 a month, and he was kind of the pinnacle, you know. Mm-hmm. But everybody in my class, if you had good grades, you were going to get $550. So I told Mr. Yancey, I said, Mr. Yancey, going rate, and it's $550 a month. That's what the LSU graduates mostly are getting, the ones who had pretty decent grades. And he was pretty, insistent on they weren't, they weren't going to pay that. It was $500. And I said, well, sir, I said, I've got a wife and 2 children. And, that I think I'm justified at $550, and that's what I'd like to have. He said, well, we do have some perks now. I said, well, what are the perks? He said, well, we represent the T&P Railroad. And he said, we can give you a pass to ride the train. I said, well, where does the train go? He said, well, it used to go all over the state and to Baton Rouge, but it just goes to Coshada now. I said, isn't Coshada pretty close? And he said, well, yeah, it is, and actually it's mostly freight. But he said, we can give you a pass. I said, well, anyway. I said, well, anyway, I'm sorry, Mr. Yancey. My offer in Baton Rouge is $550, and I have I had a couple other offers. I had an offer from Booth Lockhart, which was $550 here, and I said, I think I'm entitled to $550, and so we adjourned the meeting, and then he called me a couple of days later and said, okay, we'll pay the $550. So I learned a little bit about being a lawyer, negotiating with Mr. Yancey, Steve's dad.
You stayed with Cook Clark for what, about 8 or 7 years?
12 years.
12 years, okay.
12 to 1978, and I left then, and I loved my years there because everybody was great. I just thought I wanted to be my own boss, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did. Cook Clark was great for me because, as you know, it's a general practice firm. I was able to, I did everything until I learned that I gravitated into trial work because that's what I liked, but I didn't know that when I first got out of law school. I didn't know what kind of law I wanted to practice. I just didn't have any idea. So I did labor law for Cook Clark. I did contract work. I did a little bit of bank work. I did foreclosures. I did collection work, subrogation work, which you remember. Sure. We don't do anymore.
Right.
And I just had a smattering of everything, and you don't get that a lot of places.
Right.
So I just wanted to form a trial firm, a small trial firm is what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. It was Rountree, Cox, Guin, and Ashe. That was our name. And we had 6 lawyers at the highest, the most lawyers, and that I got to. I didn't want to have any more than that. But anyway, practice from that.
Tell us about some of your, first I'd like to hear about some of your cases that you thought were particularly interesting, and then I want to ask you about some of the lawyers that you practiced with and against, and get your thoughts about those folks.
Okay. Well, you back in our day, and I'm talking about you too, because we've been friends a long time, and when you decided to interview with Cook Clark in Shreveport, because you were practicing in New Orleans with a large firm, and I'm the one that met you and Mary at the airport.
That's absolutely right.
And took you to the interview and all that stuff. So that was like what, 1972 or
72,
3? 72. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway. I lost my train of thought. We were saying
cases.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I know that, but I was anyway. Okay, yeah. The people. You make so many good friends who are lawyers, and what I was going to say is, it's coming back to me now that back in those days, lawyers were more trustworthy of other lawyers. and you could have a telephone conversation and with another lawyer, and you could bank on it. It was going to happen. You know, now everything's got to be in writing to protect yourself and all that, but that's not the way it was then. And you could still be friends with a plaintiff lawyer if you're a defense lawyer, and vice versa. And back in those days, too, we tried a lot of cases. And you don't try that many anymore, not nearly as many. They're settled, but the mediation has changed things, and I guess for the better. But anyway, you and I and the people in our age group, we got a lot of trial experience pretty fast. But one of the cases I remember, which is I'm gonna give you a couple of funny stories that I consider, not the serious stuff, but I call it the chicken feather case. Pardon me. I'm sorry. Don Miller was one of our good friends. As you well know, he's a really good friend of yours, and he's a good friend of mine. He's a plaintiff lawyer. Well, anyway, I represented the Caddo Parish School Board, and he sued the school board, and I call it the chicken feather case, because the allegations in the petition were that the school board served chicken with feathers on it. And
this is a school cafeteria.
In the school cafeteria, and this this young girl, she was in the 7th or 8th grade. Number one, the plaintiff, she didn't eat the chicken with the feathers on it. She took it home to Mama. So Don Miller represented the family, and so I'm going backwards in it because I didn't know all this happened at the time, but I found out later. But Don and the mother of this young lady, I don't know if Don was involved in this, but the mother took that chicken wing. It was a chicken wing with with feathers on it, a couple of feathers, and she was a beauty shop operator, and she waited until the summertime, and there was no heat in this particular room, so she put it on the windowsill, and so the sun would come through, and it really just festered that chicken. The chicken got spoiled, and the leg got spoiled. It grew, and it just looked horrible with these feathers sticking out of it.
I bet it smelled horrible too.
I'm sure it did. Well, Don Miller, I guess, thought it was funny, and maybe he suggested she do that. I don't know, but anyway, he took it after it was all festered up and swollen up, and put it in his freezer because he wanted to use it as evidence at the trial.
God.
See, what happens is that the school board was getting the chicken from the federal folks to come into the public schools and all that. That's where a lot of the food would come from, and apparently our cafeteria workers at that school, I don't remember which school it was, didn't check it. Didn't check the chicken. They just defrosted it and put it out, and there were feathers on this particular wing. So those were the allegations, and Don Miller collared a psychiatrist that we all are familiar with, Dr. Paul Ware, back in those days, and he wrote a report saying that even though the little girl did not eat the chicken and get sick or anything, that she was psychologically affected, and she didn't like chicken anymore, and so she didn't want to eat any chicken, and so that's the gist of the expert testimony. So we tried the case, and of course my defense was, number one, she didn't get sick because she didn't eat it, and how could anybody get a phobia or psychologically damaged from looking at a feather or two? And also, back in those days, and I'm not sure what it is now, but for you to recover on a food case, you had to have a foreign substance in the food, like a cherry pie. I always use that example. The seed of a cherry pie, if you break your tooth on it, you can't recover. But if it's a foreign substance like a piece of glass, you could recover. Okay, fine. So I made the argument that the feather was part of the chicken, indigenous to the chicken, and therefore legally she couldn't win. But Gail Hamilton was the judge, and Gail didn't know what to do with the case. And finally he said, he looked at Don at the end of the trial. He said, Don, I don't really see any liability in it, but I'm going to award you $50 because the school board shouldn't be serving chicken with feathers on it to our kids. So we had to, pay a $50 judgment plus the court costs.
Yeah.
So he got, he probably spent more money on paying Paul Ware than it cost us. But anyway, I got another one. Let me see. Let me look at my notes. I've been trying to write them. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like we all did back in those days, we represented liability insurance companies. And I represented a company, which was a Reliance Insurance Company. And for some reason, they were sending me not only on cases to all over North Louisiana, they started sending me sometimes to South Louisiana. They had to go try a case in Terrebonne Parish one time, Houma, Louisiana. And then this one was in Marksville. And it was a rear-ender, and our insured had rear-ended a Cajun down there, okay? And it was clear liability, but the plaintiff lawyer, who you remember, Chris Roy, a good man, I think a good man, a damn good lawyer. And he represented the plaintiff, and it was just a question of money. So I go down to Marksville for the trial. And so we get there, and Chris tells the court, he said, now, Judge, he says, time out. You did it too. I forgot to turn. I forgot to turn.
Jim Campbell.
I forgot to turn mine off too. And so anyway, he says, Judge, I don't really know how we're going to do this, but I think I know. He said, my client really can't speak English. He just speaks, as we call it down here, Judge, Kunas. And he's Cajun. He says he speaks French Canadian. He can't really speak good English, and so the judge thinks about it a few minutes, and I pipe up and say, well, Judge, how can I cross-examine him, the plaintiff, if he doesn't speak English? He says, I sure can't speak Cajun. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, Mr. Rountree, let's do it this way. He said, and Mr. Roy is going to have to do the same thing. When he asks a question, Mr. Roy is going to have to ask it in English so you can understand it. He said, then what I will do, I will interpret it because I can speak Cajun. I'll tell the witness, the plaintiff, what it is, the question, and then he'll answer it in Cajun, and I'll interpret again and give you the answer in English.
That's better than letting Chris Roy be the interpreter.
Yeah, it's much better. Yeah, great. Anyway, so yeah, that would have been worse. But so anyway, that's the way we did it, and it was laborious, tedious, and I didn't know what the hell was happening most of the time. And when I got to the point to cross-examine him, I started slowly. Few simple questions to kind of see how I was going to go, and then the judge would interpret and ask the Cajun the question, my question in Kunas, and he would answer that way, and the judge would reinterpret. So when I got to the major question on causation and his damages, I asked the question. The judge interpreted my question and translated it for the plaintiff. And it's the male plaintiff. The wife didn't testify, just the male. And I guess he was the main plaintiff. But anyway, he goes into this diatribe. I don't understand a word, but it must have taken 5 minutes at least. He goes on and on and on and on, up and down, and getting anxious and angry and everything. And, it just takes on forever. And it's all over. And I said, well, Judge, what did he say? And he looked at me, he said, Mr. Rountree, he said, no. I said, what? He said, no. I said, no? He said, yes. No. He said, no. I said, that's all he said? He was talking for 5 minutes, Judge. He says, well, that's what he means. That's what he means. So I looked at Chris and kind of laughed and I said, well, I guess you got me. So it's all over. But, things like that happen. And you remember funny things, not the serious, acrimonious cases that you're glad are over.
Yeah.
But anyway.
How about some of the lawyers that were particularly noteworthy? Characters or
to me,
or competency or any things that made them outstanding?
To me, Don Miller was a good trial lawyer and a good person. And I think he started out initially in practice where he was all plaintiff and tried to be a little gruff, but he mellowed and we became real good friends, just like you became good friends with him. David Klotz was one that I'll never forget. He was one of my closest friends. He was, you remember David, he was about 5'6", probably, maybe 5'5". His partner Bodenheimer said he was a little German Jew. And so, but David was such a character. I mean, he was more than a good guy and a good lawyer. He was a character. He would, he's one that really loved the practice of law because he was practicing law 24 hours a day. I remember he would call me at 2 a.m. in the morning and wake me up and say, well, David, and he said, Gordon, I'm involved in this case now, and it's this and that, and the plaintiff lawyer's done this. What do you think? What do you think? I said, David, it's 2 a.m. in the morning. Let's talk about this tomorrow. He said, in the morning, I'm in bed, I'm sleeping, David. He says, okay. But anyway, what do you think about this? And he was just that way.
Would you describe David as being impetuous?
Oh, yeah. Impetuous, impatient, but hilarious and just funny. I remember one story where he back in those days, you remember, there was KCS had a train to Baton Rouge. And this is a David Klotz story. And so for the football games, it would go down in the afternoon, and you go to the game, get back on the train after drinking a lot and watching LSU play, and then come back to Shreveport. Well, one experience, I was not on this trip, but I know the story well. David was late getting to the train to go down to Baton Rouge that time, and the train left. And David just had to go to the LSU game, and so he jumped in his car and caught the train in Natchitoches. And, left his car there and all that, and went down and played cards all the way, and drank too much, and LSU played, and they came back. And, of course, David got all the way back to Shreveport and got out, started looking around the parking lot. His car wasn't there. And he didn't remember that he left his car in Natchitoches. So anyway, he had to retrieve his car. So that's typical of Klotz. So
Yeah, absolutely.
he was such a wonderful guy. As far as, there were a lot of good trial lawyers, Herschel, you know that. I mean, you're an excellent trial lawyer. Jim Bodenheimer, David's partner, was probably the best I ever saw on cross-examining a doctor. I mean, he could just do it. He was awesome. And he was pretty eccentric too. Bodie had his rules. Now this is GM, the dad, not Jim, Jim, not little Jim. As you know that. But GM would, wherever he was and whatever he was doing, he was going to quit at 5 o'clock. And I remember we had a case where we had to go. It's that Carla Charcoal case. We tried in Natchitoches, and it took about 3 months total. We had 2 blocks of time. One was about 5-6 weeks, and the other one was too. And we would have to go on trips and take expert depositions. We went to California. We're in expert depositions, and the expert was not finished at 5 o'clock, but Bodie quit at 5. Didn't matter. And so what the situation was, he was going to stop at 5 o'clock, and he'd go wherever he's staying or at his home. He'd go get in the swimming pool, and he'd swim a few laps, and then drink scotch, and eat and go to bed. But he didn't deviate from that routine. But I got to tell you one story about Carla Charcoal, which was Carla Charcoal was a charcoal manufacturing plant, and it wasn't in Natchitoches, but it was close to Natchitoches. I can't remember where it actually was. I was involved in the trial. There were a lot of lawyers involved in the trial, probably 10 of us. It was a big case. Carla Charcoal had sued the 2 primary vendors because they were going to make charcoal out of wood chips. They'd take the wood chips and they'd go through this process and create charcoal. And they thought they could do it pretty cheaply that way. And it made good sense anyways, but because of the non-compatibility of the systems that would change and convert the wood chips into charcoal, it didn't work and it failed. And so the Carla Charcoal filed suit against these 2 companies and lots of others, including Southern Builders. I didn't represent one of those companies. I represented a subcontractor. But anyway, I was a kind of a minor player. And I don't know, do you remember Charlie Took?
Sure.
Did I tell you that? I told you this story before, but anyway, I'm gonna go ahead. Charlie represented the general contractor, Southern Builders, that had contracted everything out. They really didn't do anything but oversee the work. And Charlie was an older, wonderful guy, but he was a kind of a crotchety. He could be that way, but he was funny as well. He was in the legislature in Louisiana in the down in Baton Rouge for a while. He's a good lawyer. But he was either black or white with him, right or wrong. But anyway, he had such a minor part to play, and it was a long, boring trial. It was really boring. And unless you were involved in the questioning, there wasn't much to do, because it just, if you didn't represent one of those two defendants, you weren't working very hard, as a matter of fact. But so in the afternoons in the summer, even though there was air conditioning in that courthouse, and they didn't have this in DeSoto Parish, you remember? Mm-hmm. In DeSoto Parish in the summertime, they didn't have any air conditioning, so you were just hot.
Same way in Coshada for a long time.
Yeah.
And they'd have to stop the trial when the log trucks came by, because they made so much noise you couldn't hear the witness.
So anyway, so Charlie, one afternoon, it was probably 3 o'clock or so, Charlie fell asleep at the counsel table. I mean, he was actually not at the table. He was sitting in a chair right behind most of us, and because there wasn't enough room at the counsel table, there were so many lawyers. And he started snoring, and he was snoring loudly. You know, it was funny, and then the judge heard the snoring. Peyton Cunningham was a judge, and Peyton had a good sense of humor. And he looked down and he looked at the bailiff. He said, "Go wake him up, and wake him up gently." So the bailiff went over there and, patted Charlie on the arm or something, woke him up, and Charlie woke up. He said, the judge looks at him and said, "Mr. Took, how you doing?" He said, "Well, I guess I'm okay, Judge." He said, "Well, tell you what, why don't you just excuse yourself for the rest of the day, and that'll be fine. You can just go on. I don't think we're going to touch your client or be asking. I don't think it'll get to you today." He said, "Well, thank you, Judge." He said, this reminds me of a story." He says, kind of like when the rabbit, and excuse my language here, when the rabbit was screwing the skunk. He said, the skunk emitted this odor, and he said, the rabbit says, "I've had about as much of this good stuff as I can stand." So, referring to the trial. And so we all laughed, including the judge, and Charlie left. But those are the kind of experiences, I don't think you see much of that today.
No, they probably want to hold you in contempt or something.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But anyway.
Well, Gordon, as far as you've told us about the highlight of your law practice, and in that it's something that you enjoyed, and you are fortunate that you happen to become a lawyer. And I'd be interested to hear if you had any particular advice to give to fellows who are women, young women or young men who are just starting out in the legal profession, or who are thinking about going to law school.
Well, as you know, the legal profession's changed a lot since we were baby lawyers, young lawyers. There's a lot more acrimony today than there used to be. Lawyers could, battle it out in the courtroom and then still be friends. And it's, a lot of the younger lawyers don't have that attitude about it. A lot of it's not as much fun anymore. And that doesn't mean I like it any less, but I don't think the younger lawyers really enjoy it as much as we used to, because we used to be able to go to court a lot, and we liked each other. We had friends on the other side of the counsel table. That doesn't happen that much anymore, and I'm sad about that. I'm sorry about that. But, and another thing that bothers me about the practice of law today is it seems to me it's more about how much money you can make as a lawyer, and not that's a primary consideration to some lawyers, some of the younger lawyers, and the secondary the secondary issue is, you know, your client, taking care of your client and doing a good job. Back in our day when I know that's the way I felt, and I know you did too, you thought of the client first. And you know, the fee was kind of a secondary thing. You wanted to do a good job for the client. And I don't think that exists today as much as it used to, and I'm sorry about that. So if I were giving a young lawyer advice, I'd tell him to be sure he wanted to do practice law, because it's not the easiest way to make a living, because you have to work hard, and probably harder today to make a good living at it than it used to be. Because it's a lot more expensive to practice law than it used to. But I would tell the young lawyer, advise young lawyers to just be sure you want to do this, be sure you like it. If you don't like it enough, if you have questions about that, do something else, because it's a great profession. If you really like the law.
Would you agree that it would be awfully hard to do the job that you need to do if you don't like what you're doing?
Absolutely. If you don't want to go to work every day, you shouldn't be a lawyer. If you don't like law enough to enjoy going to look forward to going to work every day, you shouldn't be a lawyer, because you have to like it a lot. Because it's long hours, it's a lot of 7 days a week, and when you have a trial and you have to spend an awful lot of time getting ready and preparing. It takes a lot of, you just have to, I know, you remember Abe Fortas, who was on the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court. I read a lot about him back in the day, and when he was an attorney, practicing attorney, he would, to get ready for a trial, he'd go to a motel, take all his stuff and just leave home, go to the motel so he could work hours and hours and hours getting ready, because that's what you have to do. It's hard work. But anyway, so you have to love what you're doing, and you have to want to help. You have to have an attitude that, well, I want to help the client. I want to, this client's been wronged, and I want to right the wrong. I think you should have that attitude. But anyway, it is what it is. Things have changed, and the advertising, that 1977 Supreme Court decision, I don't think helped the legal profession at all, although court was probably right. I think the Supreme Court acknowledged that advertising of lawyers and by lawyers would breach the ethical provisions at the time, but that it was allowed by the labor laws, that lawyers should have the right to advertise and make a living just like anybody else. And advertising came in as part of that. Anyway, I don't think that was good for the legal profession, but like I say, it's probably the correct legal decision.
Anything else you'd like to mention before we sign off?
No, I appreciate the interview, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity, and I appreciate you doing what you've done and set it up, and I always enjoyed practicing law with you when we practiced law together.
We did, and I asked you a lot of questions, and what would you always ask me when I came into your office to ask you questions?
Well, I think I referred to you as 20 questions because they used to have a TV show. It was entitled 20 Questions because you had a bunch of them. But anyway, I enjoyed those 12 years at your firm a lot. Anyway.
I did too.
It's been a lot of fun.
I enjoyed practicing with you very much. You were very helpful to me.
Well, you've been helpful to me in the later years because I have to call you and ask you a lot of. I think we've evened up. I'm asking you questions now.
And I always say, Gordon, we're going to play 20 questions again today.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Because that's what you'd ask me.
You're right.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Okay.